What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at the Shattered Space DLC for Starfield, which expands upon House Va'ruun and its mysterious origins that were hinted at in the base game but never really elaborated upon. Now, before we dive into all of that, a few general things to know. For starters, I did not get a review key of this DLC per se, but when I got a review key for the base game back when it released, they gave me the premium edition, I think it was, that had the DLC with it, so I was able to just play it when it launched, which did technically come from Bethesda, but again, that was more just a coincidence than anything intentional, which is why I had to wait for the release day like everybody else. Now, to that end, I actually want to lead this video a little bit with my biggest gripe for this DLC by far, which is simply put the price tag of the thing. They are asking $30 for this DLC, which is, I would say, roughly 10 hours long, especially if you're doing a lot of the side stuff, maybe more depending on how diligent you are with the exploration. And while it does some fun stuff that the base game does not do, half the price of a full-size game is a lot to ask for DLC, and I really feel like it should have been more like 20. And then the last thing I want to mention before we get fully into what this DLC has to offer is the technical side of things. So I didn't personally experience any bugs outside of some minor visual stuff, but I had seen some reports of people having trouble getting the game to launch following the release of the DLC, and as always, just a friendly reminder to update or remove your mods, and then verify all your files before you get all that sorted out, because 9 out of 10 that's going to be your problem in instances like this. But that said, modders are pretty quick, so I know a lot of the popular ones are updated already. So let's jump into this. First and foremost, how do you start this DLC? What are the requirements, etc.? Well, the DLC becomes available pretty much right after you complete the intro to the game, so it's available very quickly, but the recommended level is 35. But it looks like, from what I experienced, that it will scale pretty easily up to about level 100. So pretty much anywhere in that range for the base first run through the game, and you should be plenty fine. But in order to start the DLC, you basically need to travel to any system that is not where like a main city is. If you go to where a main city is, you're going to get some information about them scanning you for illicit cargo, which seems to supersede the DLC start. So you need to go to a system where that is not going to happen. And then you'll suddenly see a space station there, even if it's somewhere it shouldn't be normally. You'll then be able to board and explore that space station, which is the sort of starting dungeon for it, and almost immediately you'll start coming across vortex phantoms. And we'll get to those guys in a moment, but essentially this space station was conducting experiments and was equipped with a grav drive, so it jumps around places where other space stations just normally wouldn't be. And when you finally get that situation sorted out, it initiates an automatic jump with your ship attached to the space station and transports you to the homeworld of House Va'ruun, Va'ruun Kai, or more specifically a moon, I should say, where you find yourself in contact with, of course, House Va'ruun. And it would seem House Va'ruun is going through some troubles, to say the very least. They were experimenting with grav drives, the things that allow us to warp jump across space and travel to different systems, but something went horribly wrong, wiping out most of their city, while also causing all sorts of fluctuations in space and time, resulting in both things like vortex phantoms and vortex horrors, which honestly just by itself feels like a very solid departure from the rest of the game, just in terms of looks and feel, and at certain points there's almost like a little bit of a horror vibe to it that I really enjoyed. Now that's basically as much as I want to say about the story for the sake of the people who are actually going to play this for themselves, but a few general thoughts. There are a couple things I liked. For starters, there's some twists near the end that I thought were especially interesting because you get to find out basically exactly what this grav drive research was all about and why they were doing this, and there was some really cool reasoning there. Now the second part of that is just that it is an evaluation of House Va'ruun, because these are effectively religious fanatics. They all follow a prophet, to their eyes, who claims to have been in touch with some cosmic entity that they call the Great Serpent. And while once upon a time this led them to lead what they call the Serpent Crusade on the settled systems, they've since drawn back into themselves in isolation, not least of which because of their current problems, though that is certainly more recent. Now what I really liked here though is that it dives into what these people believe and some of the common sense questions you might have when looking at their culture. For instance, what happens to somebody who doesn't want to be involved with all this religious stuff, who just happens to be born here on this moon? And there's a lot of little quests that dive into just how the everyday person lives and deals with all that. And I thought taking a look at some of those things was where this DLC shined the most outside of some of those last few story quests that I thought were really cool. Now, another big portion of this DLC, though, is that it takes place on a more handcrafted world. There's a pretty big-sized area directly around the main city that is much more handcrafted than what you might be used to. Now, if you go farther out on the rest of the planet, it seems to take the rest of the game's approach to more sparse little things you can find and explore out in the environment, albeit themed and filled with content appropriate for this DLC. But the nice thing to that handcrafted approach is that it really feels like it brings to this area what the rest of the base game was missing, which is, handcrafted explorable content that wasn't just a few cities. And I can honestly say that I was more interested and compelled to explore just this little planet simply because of that. And everything does, in fact, feel much more intentional as a result. And for what it's worth, I substantially enjoyed the aesthetic and visuals of this world a lot more than most of the locations in the base game as well. Now, unfortunately, I will say that this DLC does not come with any changes in the way combat or any other systems play out. There are some new weapons and some new armors, of course, but I wouldn't say any of them are really going to change the way you play, because even though while I did personally explore with more weapons and the like available here, that was more due to the fact that they deal substantially more damage than anything else I had found, though they didn't really alter the play style or functionality of those weapons, I should say. So I do wish that part was a bit more fleshed out as well. Now luckily, I do think they make up for that a little bit in just the volume of skills and things you have at your disposal that come up in dialogue and provide you extra options here. It seems like they really wanted to dial in on that, because almost every quest or conversation I had here, I was able to use one of my skills to reply, open up options, persuade somebody, etc. So it does kind of feel like they leaned into that specific aspect pretty heavily here, which was nice to see. To start wrapping this up, I will say that on the positive side of things, I think this DLC is much better in terms of handling things like exploration and giving you a more tailored experience when it comes to running around. And I thought House Varun and the exploration of their culture alongside some of the choices that you can make in the main story were a lot of fun, even if it does get off to a little bit of a slow start. But on the flip side of that, I do think there is a distinct lack of unique things like fresh armors and weapons and stuff, because there are some of those, don't get me wrong, but I was a little underwhelmed in the quantity of them. And then there's the price of this one. $30 for a DLC is a lot, frankly. And for like $20, it would have been easier to recommend, because while I mostly enjoyed what this DLC had to offer, it does have some flaws, and there just isn't enough here to really warrant half the price of a full-priced game. But I think that is as good a place as any to wrap up this particular video, so I certainly hope you enjoyed it, found it informative. Do let me know what you think about Shattered Space down in the comment section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.